We're taking the world brief and the review of some of the headlines of today's newspapers from around the world. And we begin with President-elect Donald Trump, who says that he will not rule out the use of military force to seize the control of the Panama Canal and Greenland, as he declared U.S. control of both to be vital to American national security. Speaking to reporters less than 2 weeks before he takes office on January 20th, and as a delegation of aides and advisors that includes Donald Trump Jr. is in Greenland, Trump left open the use of the American military to secure both territories. Trump's intention marks a rejection of decades of U.S. policy that has prioritized self-determination over territorial expansion.
Your references to Greenland and the Panama Canal, so forth. Can you assure the world that as you try to get control of these areas, you are not going to use military or economic coercion?
No.
And can you tell us a little bit about what your plan is? What is the strategy?
Yeah, I can't assure you, you're talking about Panama and Greenland. No, I can't assure you on either of those two. But I can say this, we need them for economic security. The Panama Canal was built for our military. I'm not going to commit to that now. It might be that you'll have to do something. Look, the Panama Canal is vital to our country. It's being operated by China. China. And we gave the Panama Canal to Panama. We didn't give it to China. And they've abused it. They've abused that gift. It should have never been made, by the way. Giving the Panama Canal is why Jimmy Carter lost the election, in my opinion, more so maybe than the hostages. The hostages were a big deal. But if you remember, and nobody wants to talk about the Panama Canal now because, you know, it's inappropriate, I guess, but because it's a bad part of the Carter legacy. But he was a good man. Look, he was a good man. I knew him a little bit, and he was a very fine person, but that was a big mistake. Well, we need Greenland for national security purposes. I've been told that for a long time, long before I even ran. I mean, people have been talking about it for a long time. You have approximately 45,000 people there. People really don't even know if Denmark has any legal right to it. But if they do, they should give it up because we need it for national security. That's for the free world. I'm talking about protecting the free world. You look at, you don't even need binoculars. You look outside, you have China ships all over the place. You have Russian ships all over the place. We're not letting that happen. We're not letting it happen. And if Denmark wants to get to a conclusion, but nobody knows if they even have any right, title, or interest. The people are going to probably vote for independence or to come into the United States. But if they did do that, then I would tariff Denmark at a very high level.
Well, it's going to be an eventful 4 years under Donald Trump. Now, still in the United States, nearly 44 years after Jimmy Carter left the nation's capital in humbling defeat, the 39th president returned to Washington for 3 days of state funeral rites. A bipartisan delegation of members of Congress were led into the Capitol Rotunda by Senators Raphael Warnock and Jon Ossoff, Democrats who represent Carter's home state. Vice President Kamala Harris, members of President Joe Biden's cabinet, and 3 of the 9 U.S. Supreme Court justices were also present. The U.S. Army Band Brass Quintet played as people awaited the casket. The room fell silent as 3 knocks on the rotunda door marked Carter's arrival. The casket was placed in the middle of the room in the Lincoln catafalque, a platform built in 1865 to hold the casket of slain President Abraham Lincoln in the same place. Harris, Senate Majority Leader John Thune, and House Speaker Mike Johnson delivered eulogies celebrating Carter's faith, military service, and devotion to service, including his hands-on contributions to building homes for those in need through Habitat for Humanity.
Today, I join all Americans in mourning President Carter and remembering his example. But I rejoice in the thought that he, together with his beloved wife, Rosalind, is now before the face of his father.
We all know that his care for humanity didn't stop at building homes. In the face of illness, President Jimmy Carter brought life-saving medicine. In the face of conflict, he brokered peace. In the face of discrimination, he reminded us that we are all made in the image of God. And if you were to ask him why he did it all, he would likely point to his faith.
He was the first president of the United States to have a comprehensive energy policy, including providing some of the first federal support for clean energy. He also passed over a dozen major pieces of legislation regarding environmental protection, and more than doubled the size of America's national parks.
Now, elsewhere, Jean-Marie Le Pen, founder of French far-right and Devil of the Republic, known as Devil of the Republic, has died at the age of 96. Le Pen's supporters saw him as a charismatic champion of the everyday man, unafraid to speak out on hard topics. And for several decades, he was seen as France's most controversial political figure. His critics denounced him as a far-right bigot, and the courts convicted him several times for his radical remarks. Jean-Marie Le Pen founded France's far-right in the 1970s and mounted a strong challenge for the presidency, but it was only when he handed the reins on to his daughter that his rebranded party caught sight of power. The so-called Devil of the Republic came runner-up in the 2002 French presidential election, but he was resoundingly defeated. That devil had to be taken out of the National Front if it was going to progress further, a process that became known as de-demonization. And those are some of the top stories around the world. Of course, there's plenty more happening, but this is what we're focusing on today.
I'm going to stay on Jean-Marie Le Pen, father of Marine Le Pen herself, who we've been talking about, who has been in the news recently following the, shall I say, emergence or more popular vote of the far-right, what has been known as the far-right for a very long time, in recent times in France, and just talking about how the far-right has emerged on the European continent. But let me focus on her father, who handed the reins of the party to her. You've described him in many words, as has been known. He's said to be known as the founder of France's post-war far-right movement. And in the period since he founded the party, he has been in the news for very controversial, things, and he never stopped even up until his death. And he fell out very massively with his daughter, famously, and she had to kick him out of the party because of his very radical views and what she felt was hurting the party's emergence and, popularity in France. A few of the few things: he was anti-immigration, anti-elite, anti-globalization, anti-EU. In fact, he felt that the EU was making France weaker, and that there were a lot of the times when there would be an extension of, any kind of for instance, I'll use the example of the giving of independence by Charles de Gaulle to Algeria, and he said that made France weaker. These were some of the things some of his views. He was also a Holocaust denier, like you mentioned. He tried to temper down the actions of the Nazis and on the Jews, and just said, oh yeah, he knew that the gas chamber must have existed, but he was a denier in that instance. He was very vocal. He was never one to shy away from controversy. In fact, he ran for presidency after setting up the Front National in 1972. He ran for presidency first time in 1974, tried again afterwards, and subsequently a number of times. At some point, was even the oldest candidate to have run against Nicolas Sarkozy, who he said was not French enough to be president at the time. So a number of things to to talk about him, but very important is the legacy of hate and extremism that he leaves behind after many years of his activism and very vocal, radical views on immigration, on the EU, on the elites, and a number of issues in France.
Okay, Jean-Marie Le Pen established in 1972 the National Front Party, which was known for anti-Semitism, which exploited blue-collar sentiments against globalization and against immigration. And in that regard, Jean-Marie Le Pen became a forerunner for the likes of Donald Trump, who are far-right wingers, and also the offspring of far-right nationalism sentiment in the whole of Europe. He spent his entire life fighting. He was in the French Legion. He was a lawyer, he read law, graduated in about 1954. But he then set up this National Front, party, which became the catalyst for anti-immigrant sentiments. He took part in 5 presidential elections. It was in 2002 that he got into the presidential runoff. But the French people decided that they didn't want an extremist. They voted for a mainstream conservative, Jacques Chirac, in the runoff, who won landslide. Now, he began to have problems, even in his own party. In 2011, his daughter, Marine Le Pen, took over as the leader of the party. In 2015, his daughter kicked him out of the party because Marine Le Pen wanted to rebrand the party and to say, look, this is a party for the working class in France, not for people who are against Jewish nationalism, who are against, who are anti-Semitic, because his father had said that the Holocaust was just a mere detail, and that anti-Semitism hobbled the National Front. Now, he didn't only have problems at the political level. He had problems even in his own family. His biography is titled No Regrets. Interestingly, his wife eloped with his own biographer. And the woman said he was a very violent man. He also had a reputation for being very violent anytime he went out, on a night trip on the corridors of Paris. But I see that President Macron has been very quiet about the tribute that he paid. He says, well, history, opinion will judge him and all of that. But that was a force in French politics for 40 years. There's no doubt about that. And he was unrepentant about the choice, the nationalistic choice that he made. He said he was protecting France. To go very quickly to Trump. He has made it very clear that he wants Greenland because he thinks Greenland is strategic to the national interest of the United States. Now, the Egede, the Prime Minister of Greenland, Denmark, the Prime Minister of Denmark has been in possession of Greenland since 1416. But it's the shortest distance between the Arctic region and the northern, Pacific Ocean. And Trump says it is very strategic to American interests. The Danish, they are saying they don't want to sell. In his first term, Donald Trump wanted Greenland. Now, this time around, he says he's going to take it for economic security, either by military means or through sanctions. He has said he will impose tariffs on imports from Denmark if Egede does not agree. His son, yesterday, Donald Trump Jr., visited Greenland. He said he was on a tourist trip. The second issue is the Panama Canal. It was America that built the Panama Canal in the early 1900s, the early 19th century. In 1876, America wanted to take over the Panama Canal. Now, that didn't happen. President Harry S. Truman, in 1946, also wanted to take control of the Panama Canal. However, in 1977, a decision was taken by President Carter, now late, to hand over the Panama Canal to Mexico. They both controlled that Panama Canal till 1999. Now, in 1999, America withdrew. Mexico took full control. Now, Trump is saying, he said it in his first term, now he's saying it as he's preparing for his second term, that America will take over the Panama Canal. Why? Two reasons. He says the charges are too high for America's use of the canal. And two, he says that China has more interest in that territory than America. Now, China became an ally of Panama and Mexico in 2017 after those countries withdrew their support for Taiwan. So this is the geopolitics of the matter. But the key thing is that two things. He's saying he wants to use military means, if possible. Now, the problem is that will be a reversal of American foreign policy process. America has not, since the 18th century to date, projected itself as a conquering, expansionist power in the world. But that is what Trump is suggesting. He's even saying he will make Greenland great again. So what we see is the turbulence that Donald Trump is likely to bring to global politics.
Absolutely. And very quickly on that, I believe it was Craig Ferguson who said, referring to Canada, he said, Canada is not the party, it's the apartment above the party. I think same goes for Greenland. America is not looking for Greenland itself, but probably what's downstairs, what's under the ground. Now, let's move on to the news headlines from as we see them in the front pages of today's newspapers. We start with This Day newspaper, and This Day, of course, leads with President Tinubu leading Obasanjo, Jonathan, others to Mahama's inauguration. We've already discussed that in great detail and beautiful imagery from that outing. But above that is a story that details how in 2024, the Nigeria police force dismantled 5,049 malicious domains, cybercrime syndicates in Nigeria through the Nigeria Police Force Cybercrime Center, and they were able to recover 8 billion naira as well as $84,000, and this was restituted to the victims of cybercrime. So a big victory for the Nigerian Police Force concerning cybercrime. We'll now move to Punch newspaper. Punch, of course, as most newspapers are today, are leading with the imagery from the inauguration yesterday. The lead story there is Bandits Influx Task Force meets as Amotekun police tighten the southwest boundaries. However, what caught my attention is above the masthead there, it reads, Forex allocation for fuel imports have risen to $1.25 billion. So that's a report from Punch newspaper. We're continuing to follow all that's happening with regards to fuel, domestic supply, refining, and importation. So the question that one would ask is, if the cost of fuel importation is rising, what is happening with our domestic supply that has been celebrated so much as having reduced the price of fuel? Now we move to Vanguard. Vanguard is looking at the health sector as their lead story. It says how lack of power, water, japa degrades health sector. Now, I think this is a very timely front page and a timely investigation, as of course we are waiting on our lawmakers to go through the budget in great detail, because one of the issues detailed here, of course, is the lack of funding that is given by the government to the health sector. So, we continue to urge Nigerians to, go online, look for that budget, look at every single line item in detail, and see what exactly our nation's money is being allocated towards, so that we can speak before it's passed. It's aimed to be passed at the end of this month. Now let's move to the New Telegraph. New Telegraph, again, leading with President Tinubu's speech at the inauguration of President Mahama. However, at the very top of the page is a statement from findings from the Manufacturing Association of Nigeria. And they're saying that Nigeria's debt has moved from 87.38 trillion naira to 134.3 trillion naira without growth. So they're advocating for the fiscal to look for that balance between borrowing for growth and maintaining debt sustainability. They're basically putting out a red flag to say our debt currently is unsustainable. Quickly to the Guardian newspaper. The Guardian is talking about investment on the stock exchange and on the Nigerian stock exchange. Talks about investors are eyeing new listings because just 10 players control 54% of the NGX's 63 trillion naira. So of course the usual suspects there, your Dangotes, your Buas, your MTNs and so forth. So it's looking at people interested in diversifying their portfolios this year. Now we'll look at some African papers. The Standard, Kenya. Today, the Inspector General of Police, Douglas Kanja, will be in court. The Standard of Kenya. And of course, this is all around the abductions. So bold headline there, abductions. What does this man know? The question is, will today's court proceedings reveal any new information as to what has transpired since those tax reform protests that took place last year? Young Kenyans have been disappearing at an alarming rate, especially those who are activists. Now to the Daily Graphic of Ghana, just because this is a really beautiful image. Mahama takes office, and of course, Dr. Jane Nana Opoku Ageman also there and being celebrated as Ghana's first female vice president. And we round up with the Wall Street Journal. Wall Street Journal always looks at a number of stories. However, focusing on Meta, big news yesterday from the Wall Street Journal, of course, globally, which is that Meta is said to stop fact-checking on issues, especially concerning gender identity on their platforms. So those are today's newspaper headlines.
All right. Thank you so much, Vimbai, for the World Review and also newspapers. I was going to look at the Vanguard. I think that's a very good report that Nigerians should read. I love how they start off with the challenges, but at the end propose solutions or some of the things that must be done this year to ensure that we're able to improve or see a better health sector in Nigeria.